Let's be honest. Have you ever signed something without reading all that tiny fine print? We've all been there. But what if that agreement you just made was, fundamentally unfair? Well, today we're diving deep into a crucial part of the Indian Contract Act, free consent. It's the secret sauce that separates a rock-solid deal from one that can just fall apart.
So, what's on the docket for today? First, we're going to unpack what free consent really means. Then we'll get into the juicy stuff, how things can go seriously wrong with some amazing real-life court battles. And finally, we'll see what you can actually do when a deal is built on shaky ground. Let's jump in.
All right, first things first, let's lay the foundation. For any contract to actually be a contract, there has to be a genuine meeting of the minds. It means everybody involved has to be on the exact same page. So, think about this for a second. Is every single promise you make a legally binding contract? I mean, if you tell your friend, yeah, I'll totally help you move this weekend, can they actually sue you if you bail? The answer is no, of course not. But why not? What's the difference?
Well, the answer boils down to two simple words: free consent. And the Indian Contract Act is super clear about this. For an agreement to be legit, everyone needs to agree on the same thing in the same way. And, this is the important part, that consent is only considered free if it wasn't caused by one of these 5 big no-nos: being forced, being unfairly influenced, being lied to, being misled, or making a huge mistake.
So let's kick things off with that second one: undue influence. This is what happens when a relationship built on trust gets twisted for someone's personal gain. And there's no better way to get this than by looking at the, frankly, heartbreaking story of an elderly farmer named Mr. Bundy.
Imagine this. Mr. Bundy put all of his faith into his local bank manager, a guy he'd known and trusted for years. But that very trust led him to make a decision that put his home, his entire life's work, on the line for a business that was already failing.
Okay, so here's the play-by-play. Mr. Bundy was a loyal, long-time customer. His son's business, which also banked there, was going down the drain. The bank manager, who Bundy trusted completely, told him, hey, you should guarantee your son's company's debts. To do that, Bundy had to mortgage his farmhouse, his only asset. And here's the real kicker. At no point did the bank say, you should probably talk to a lawyer about this. So when the son's company inevitably failed, the bank came after Mr. Bundy's house.
And that right there is a textbook case of undue influence. The law basically says this is when one side has a ton of power over the other, like a bank over a longtime trusting customer, and uses that dominant position to get an unfair advantage. It's all about exploiting that special relationship.
So what happened in court? Well, the court sided with Mr. Bundy, and they threw out the mortgage. They said his consent wasn't freely given. Why? Because there was a massive inequality of bargaining power. There was a relationship of trust. The deal was obviously terrible for Bundy. The bank had a massive conflict of interest, and he never got independent advice. It's a perfect example of the law stepping in to protect the little guy.
Okay, now let's switch gears and talk about the line between a flat-out, deliberate lie and just an honest mistake. In the eyes of the law, this is the massive difference between fraud and what's called misrepresentation. And 2 classic cases show us exactly where that line is.
Just look at the difference here. Fraud is all about intention. You're trying to deceive someone to get them into a contract. Misrepresentation, on the other hand, is an innocent mistake. The person making the statement honestly believes it's true. It really all boils down to one question. Did you know you were lying?
And these 2 cases just lay it all out perfectly. In Dairy versus Peak, the company directors said they had the right to use steam power. They honestly believed they would get the final approval. They were wrong, but they weren't lying. So the court said not fraud. Then you have Bissett versus Wilkinson. The seller of a farm said he thought the land could support 2,000 sheep. He'd never farmed sheep there. It was just his honest opinion, not a fact, so no misrepresentation.
And Dairy v. Peak is huge because it gave us this classic 3-part test for what counts as fraud. To prove it, you have to show the statement was made either 1, knowing it was false, 2, without actually believing it was true, or 3, and this one is key, just recklessly, without caring one bit whether it was true or false. That's actually a pretty high bar to clear.
And the big takeaway from Bissett versus Wilkinson is just as important. A statement of opinion is not the same as a statement of fact, especially when both parties kind of know that the person giving the opinion is just making an educated guess. It's not a guarantee.
All right, so what happens when a contract is so wildly unfair, so completely one-sided that it just feels, well, wrong? This is where the legal world brings in this really cool idea of public policy.
This case is the perfect example. Check this out. A massive, powerful company could fire a permanent employee with just 3 months' notice for basically any reason. But if that same employee wanted to quit, they had to give 6 months' notice. Does that sound a little familiar to anyone who's ever signed an employment contract? It's a glaring imbalance of power.
The Supreme Court of India took one look at this and said, absolutely not. They called this kind of term unconscionable, which is a fancy legal word for something that is so unfair it's shocking to the conscience. Because of that massive power imbalance, the employee had no real choice. They had to sign it to get the job. The court basically said the law will not be used to enforce contracts that are just fundamentally wrong.
So we've seen all the ways a contract can be built on a shaky foundation. But if you're the one who was wronged, what can you actually do about it? Let's talk about the remedies.
Now this is really cool. The law gives the person who was wronged a choice. The contract isn't automatically destroyed. Instead, it becomes voidable. And that's a huge deal. It means the person who was misled or pressured gets to decide what happens next. They hold the power. They can choose to go through with the deal anyway, or they can choose to cancel it. And here's another key distinction. If you were misled by an honest mistake, a misrepresentation, you can basically cancel the contract. But if you were a victim of fraud, a deliberate lie, you can do more. You can not only cancel the contract, but you can also sue for damages, for any money you lost because of that lie.
Okay, so let's wrap this all up. What are the big things to remember? First, free consent isn't just a suggestion. It is the absolute bedrock of a valid contract. Second, power imbalances matter. A lot. They can be a huge red flag for undue influence. Third, when it comes to false statements, intent is everything. And fourth, courts will step in to protect people from ridiculously unfair deals. And maybe most importantly, if your consent wasn't free, the power to fix it is in your hands.
So, I'll leave you with this one final thought. The next time you're staring at a huge wall of text and you're about to click that I agree button on some terms of service, just pause for a second and ask yourself, are you really truly giving your free consent? In our modern world of digital contracts and endless fine print, how often are we actually negotiating on a level playing field?